Build your dream home with confidence. The BuildMasters podcast delivers expert interviews and real answers to simplify your toughest decisions. Each episode equips you with insider knowledge and actionable tips. Subscribe today to learn the art of building from the true masters with BuildMasters.
So last year, my family and I had the most awesome opportunity to build our own house. We were the GCs on this build. We had so many questions though along the way. I mean, from contracts, planning, foundations, all the way to final inspection, dealing with subs. I realized at that moment that my dad was my lifeline. He has over 40 years of industry knowledge, and I am super excited because we sat down with him, interviewed him for over 2 hours to really understand the finer points of building, what to look for, tips and tricks, expert advice along the way. I also realized at that point that not everybody has a father like mine that they can just call. So we compiled all of that into the BuildMasters podcast. This podcast gives you expert interviews, extremely good knowledge, so that you can feel confident about building your own house or working with a GC or other subs to make it happen for you. So stay tuned. We got a lot of great content coming, and we are super excited to share it with you.
So I'm here with my dad, Jim Wilson,
Howdy.
and we're going to be talking about some good things with building a house, especially your own custom home, some considerations. But first, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, of course, you just heard that I'm Christopher's dad. I've basically built commercial buildings for the last 40 years, almost 45. Done some houses, about 65 houses, which were not my favorite, so I tried to stick to commercial. Didn't like to work with homeowners that much. So the commercial side, was very easy because you're dealing with just the engineer and the architect and one owner's rep, so everything went pretty smooth. When you're starting to build houses, it's a whole different story. There's a lot of people involved, and just about every wife or fiance or girlfriend is an interior designer. So it gets a little bit tough, and you got to cover all your bases.
So based on that, let's kind of go through from a guide perspective and think, as you move down through, you want to build a house. Thinking, okay, now I've got the opportunity to build a house for whatever circumstances you're in. What are some of the first things you need to consider? And let's just move down through each one of those.
Really, the primary thing is, where do you want to live? What municipality, who's got what rules? If you want an HOA or don't want an HOA. Most people don't. That allows them to do a little bit more free in terms of how they design a house, how they use the land. And so, the difference is a city as compared to a county, island, or something like that. Once you decide on where you want to live, then what you want to do is check on what are all your entitlements. Main thing is if there's power, water, and sewer available, and you might have water but no sewer, so then you're going to be doing septic. Another really important thing is fire hydrants, because that's an insurance item. If you don't have a fire hydrant close by, and it's usually, I think in the good old days, it was 300 to 600 feet, something like that, then insurance is a lot more expensive. They just want you to have that kind of coverage. So once you figure out what your entitlements are, then you decide on the size of the lot that you want to buy, because that has a lot to do with whatever your footprint for your house is. You can only cover so much square footage of the lot based on the city or county zoning. And so that's a pretty big thing. If you want a big house on a small lot, not a lot of cities will let you do that. Counties where you get a 1 acre parcel, which is hard to come with in a city now, you have to go way out in the boonies. It's a lot more lax. You can put more house on a bigger lot and still have some land left over. So that's the first thing, is where do you want to live? And then you would need to find out what kind of restrictions you have, like CC&Rs. If you're not in an HOA, you probably don't have too many CC&Rs. Most counties will have certain size lots, certain setbacks, height restrictions. Everybody will have height restrictions depending on the size of the lot and what your zoning is. But then once you figure that out, then you go to the next step. And if it's a complete house build, then you want to hire a designer, architect / draftsman.
Elevate your home with Glass House. Don't settle for ordinary. Our stunning bifold and multi-slide glass doors transform any setting into a luxurious retreat. Take advantage of 50% off retail prices for unmatched value. Try our exclusive online pricing calculator for an instant estimate in seconds. Quick, easy, with no strings attached. Step into sophistication without compromise. Choose Glass House for an unparalleled customer experience at a fraction of the price.
Well, let's go back to the lot just for a second. So, considering on where you want to live, does it also make a difference on the jurisdiction and maybe getting to know some of the people who built in that area, or some of the GCs, or somebody who might know how it is to work with the inspectors and to work with the zoning commissions, things like that? Because, for example, I've heard that for example, in Los Angeles and things in California, it's sometimes very difficult. 2 years you're waiting on things to get approved for your permits, versus say in other areas, to be like where I built, very fast because they don't have a backlog. Would that make a big difference on where you're?
Well, it makes a huge difference. We were in California for a while, and we sometimes had 5 inspectors for the same thing. I mean, if we were putting in a big drain, we'd have environmental, we'd have the sewer guys, we'd have engineering, we'd have the city, we'd have the county. We'd have 5 or 6 engineers coming out and look at the very same thing, which is ridiculous. So that's what it comes back down to. Where do you want to live and how many restrictions you want?
And it could be very similar in the same city, but if you're in different counties, then it might be like, just because you're on this county line, the county might treat it very differently than if you're on this county line.
Well, you're pretty much you're either on a county island or you're in a city. So it really doesn't have to do with, being in a city in a certain county. You're basically in an island or you're in a city.
Okay.
So that's the biggest difference. The reason why it's a county island is it was just developed before the city was there, and then it didn't get annexed into the city. The people in that area decided they didn't want to get annexed into the city.
Okay.
So that's the difference between a county island and being in a city. Cities have a lot more restrictions, and just for example, I think if you wanted to build a house in Chandler right now, 10 years ago, to get a water meter was about $5,000. And to get a water meter now, because they include sewer in it, it's like $18,000 to $20,000.
Okay.
Just for the rights to have a meter put in and to flush your toilet.
So given the different counties and jurisdictions and all of that, what would you say is the typical, or what would you say would be a good turnaround time? Like, some people are waiting 2 years to get permits and things. And obviously mine was a few days because it's a very small town. What would you say is typical, or something that people should look for?
Typical turnaround in most cities that are competent, you should have about 3-month turnaround in terms of being it's 6 weeks usually for your first plan check. And then if you have any changes, it's 3 weeks. And then within about a 3-month to 5-month period, you should have a permit.
Okay.
If you give them all the right information each time. That gets back to your designer, your architect, your civil engineer. If you're not giving them, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you keep giving them garbage, they're going to keep redlining your plans.
Okay.
So you got to give them good information each time they ask.
So when considering the lot, because I know you've built on mountainsides of California, you've built in desert here in Arizona, you've also built in the mountains in Arizona. When considering like wooded lots versus say completely flat lots, what are some of the things you need to take in consideration when you're getting ready for your lot, or you're choosing a lot for that matter? Topography.
Well, a lot of it has to do with if you have a lot that hasn't been disturbed. Usually it's kind of like a 7-year rule that normally you get normal compaction in 7 years. Say you have a lot that they brought the dirt in to make a lot, and then you want to build a house on it. If it's been sitting for 7-8 years, that's considered natural compaction. If it has been recently disturbed, like you're tearing a house down to build a new house, usually you want to over excavate the pad. I think we're kind of jumping a little bit, but you want to over excavate the pad 2 to 3 feet and recompact it so you don't have a whole lot of house settling. Then you also have to know if you're building on expansive soil, which is clay soil. If you're building on clay soil, it's a different type of concrete foundation.
What about for trees? Like, let's just say somebody will very wooded lot or has a lot of trees. How's that going to affect maybe the way you build your foundations, or what do you need to get ready for?
Some wooded lots, like say, I'm sure Payson has more restrictive things in terms of how many trees you can cut down to build the house and the size. As you get further out, it's fewer restrictions, and it depends on who's watching you in terms of a lot of times you can't cut down more than a 6-inch tree in some municipalities. Some of them cut down a 30-inch tree and nobody cares, 30-inch in diameter, and nobody cares. It's just does a tree make a sound if nobody hears it? That
You probably should check, and at the same time also see how
restrictive.
much they actually follow up on it.
Right.
Too. Gotcha. Okay.
And you also want to pick a spot that's got good drainage, that kind of thing. If you're on the side of a mountain, you got to worry about too much drainage, because then you got to make sure that there's nothing above you that's going to slide into your house.
It also affects the cost of your build, right? Because if it's perfectly flat compared to if it's on a rocky hillside.
Right. Well, if you're on a pretty good slope, you're doing basically what's considered a walkout basement, where it's 2 feet off the floor. It's 2 feet off the grade in the back and maybe 9 feet off of grade in the front. And so you're basically got like a walkout basement. That's usually a mountainside development.
And that happens really fast.
Oh,
going from, because even my house, what you would see is flat, you would think is flat. I mean, it goes from a few inches for the actual porch, and then I'm 3 feet off the back almost.
Well, our log cabin up in the mountains, I could not believe when I set up a laser. I went to 2 feet for finished floor at the back master bedroom, and then tried to find the laser out towards the garage. And I kept lifting the laser up higher and higher and higher. And it was 2 feet over my head by the time I got to where the garage was.
How cost-wise, just for excavation and just for foundations, an extra block or whatever, when you're looking at that kind of, somebody might think it's flat, right? But it's actually fairly steep, not maybe like actual hillside.
Mm-hmm.
How does that increase the cost? Is that a 10% increase, a 20% increase of the price?
It's sometimes 30 to 40% increase.
Wow.
Depending on how steep it is and how much block you've got. And like if you're doing a slab on grade, that's a lot cheaper than having to do block stems and then a wooden floor. You're doing a whole lot more work to get to that point. Getting back to the area, and if they have expansive soil, now everybody does post tension. And what that is, instead of digging a footing, putting up a stem wall, then pouring the floor to the stem wall, then putting the walls up, now what it is one big continuous pour with cables in the concrete. And then after the concrete sets up, they post tension, pull everything tight so the whole slab floats, instead of the one side letting loose on one side and staying put on the other side. The whole slab
So that way you don't crack.
floats. That way you don't have cracks in your foundations and everything.
And then that would transfer up to the walls.
And that has to do with picking your lot, knowing what your soil is when you buy the lot.
Well, like our last house, your last house, my last house, all the dirt was brought in, and it was so expansive that it cracked our pool.
Mm-hmm.
It would change everything on one side of the house. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a gate that didn't work 1 month, if I watered near that gate for a couple days, and then the gate would work and swing okay because the soil was so expansive. It's hard to keep on top of that kind of stuff in a house, because you can get a lot of cracks.
Thanks for tuning in. Hit subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Be sure to explore Glass House's exclusive online pricing calculator for instant estimates on gorgeous bifold and multi-slide glass doors. Find the link in the description or visit glasshouse.co. That's glass-haus.co. Until next time.